There is a hill in Greene County, Tennessee, that the county's own road commission has rerouted around 3 times since 1890. Not because the terrain demanded it, because the original road passed through the lower edge of the Dellacort property, and each time a road crew was dispatched to maintain or improve that section, they returned before the work was done, and the explanations they gave were different each time, but amounted, in each case, to the same thing. They had gotten far enough, and had decided that was as far as they were going. The current county road curves well to the south of Hawthorn Ridge. It has curved that way since 1923. Nobody alive remembers the original route. The rerouting is documented in the Road Commission minutes as a matter of improved grade and reduced maintenance burden. The grade of the rerouted road is, by any measurement, worse. The taxes were paid in 1872. They were paid by the Greene County Sheriff's Office, which had no authority to pay them, no account from which to draw the funds, and no record of having received instructions to do so. The payment appears in the county tax ledger as a standard entry: parcel number, acreage, amount due, amount received, date, and in the column for the name of the taxpayer, in the careful hand of the county clerk, is written Dellacort Estate. Every adult member of the Dellacort family had been recorded as deceased in the 1870 mortality schedule. The deaths were listed as occurring in the period between June and October of 1869. The causes given were varied: fever, injury, decline. 11 names, 11 entries. The mortality schedule for Greene County is otherwise sparse that year. 1869 was not a year of particular epidemic or disaster in that part of Tennessee. And the sudden cluster of 11 deaths in a single household, across a 4-month period, from causes that do not suggest a shared illness, was not formally investigated. The sheriff who authorized the 1872 tax payment was a man named Amos Treadwell. His account books survive in the County Historical Society. There is no line item corresponding to the Dellacort payment. The money came from somewhere and left no trace in his records except the fact of its arrival at the tax office. Treadwell served as sheriff for 4 more years after 1872, and in that time he did not discuss the payment publicly. He mentioned it once, in a letter to his brother in 1874, in a sentence that reads, "There are arrangements in this county that I have learned to honor without examining." He offers no elaboration beyond that. His brother's reply, if there was one, has not survived. The taxes on the Dellacort land at Hawthorn Ridge were paid every year from 1833 through 1911. For the first 36 years, they were paid by Caleb Dellacort or members of his household. After the mortality schedule recorded the family's extinction in 1869, the payments continued for 42 more years, arriving at the courthouse each October in cash through mechanisms that the county clerk's annual receipts never clearly identify. The final payment, in October 1911, was the same amount as the first payment, in October 1833, despite 7 decades of changes to the county's valuation methods. Nobody appears to have noticed this until a genealogist named Frances Millard pointed it out in 1997. When she raised it with the Greene County Assessor's Office, she was told that historical tax records were not her department's area of expertise. She was referred to the Historical Society. The Historical Society confirmed the figures and said they had no explanation. Frances Millard published a 14-page paper on the Dellacort property in a regional genealogical journal in 1999. The paper is available. It is the most comprehensive public account of the Dellacort family records. It ends with a section she titled Unresolved Questions, which runs to 6 pages, nearly half the paper, and which she concluded with the following sentence, which is the last thing she wrote about the Dellacorts before she closed the project. The record is consistent in a way that records are not supposed to be consistent when the people responsible for them are gone. She has not returned to the subject since. Hawthorn Ridge runs northeast to southwest above the Nolichucky River in Greene County, in the part of East Tennessee where the mountains begin their long argument with the sky, and the old families sit in the hollows like stones in a creek, worn smooth by time and impossible to move. The ridge takes its name from the hawthorn thickets that cover its eastern slope. Dense, thorned growth that the early settlers found impenetrable in summer and merely difficult in winter, and that the Dellacort family, uniquely among the ridge's inhabitants, appears never to have cleared. Every other family on Hawthorn Ridge by the 1850s had opened fields, pushed back the thicket, made the land yield. The Dellacort property, on the north-facing slope above the ridge's high point, remained in thicket throughout the family's documented occupancy, and, as far as anyone who has visited the area can determine, remains in thicket still. The hawthorns on the Dellacort land are old. A forestry assessment conducted in 1988 for a timber company that briefly expressed interest in the adjacent property estimated the age of the thicket's dominant specimens at between 180 and 220 years, which would put their establishment in the period between 1768 and 1808, decades before the Dellacort family arrived. They were not planted by the Dellacorts. They were there before. The Dellacorts chose land that was already enclosed. The daguerreotype of Caleb Dellacort, the one held in a private collection in Greenville, the one taken at an unknown date estimated between 1855 and 1865, was examined by a photographic historian in 2002 at the request of a regional history magazine that was preparing an article on old Greene County families. The historian was asked to verify the estimated date range. She examined the plate, the case, the chemical characteristics of the image. She confirmed the date range as plausible. She noted one other thing, in a supplementary comment she appended to her written assessment. She noted that the daguerreotype showed signs of having been viewed very frequently. The case was worn at the corners and hinges in the manner of an object handled often over a long period. She noted this as an interesting detail, given that the image was of a man who had died in 1869 and whose family had effectively ceased to exist shortly after. Someone had kept this image in a case they opened regularly for a very long time. She noted this and moved on. The article was published. The daguerreotype was returned to the private collection. The collector, who had inherited it from an estate sale in 1988 and who had no established connection to the Dellacort family, was asked whether he knew how it had come to be in the estate. He said he did not. He said it had been labeled, in a hand he did not recognize, with a piece of paper tucked into the case lining. The paper was still there. It said, "Keep this. It matters that it is kept." No name on the paper, no date. The handwriting, he said, was very careful, very deliberate. The family first appears in Greene County records in 1833, when Caleb Dellacort purchased 410 acres on the north slope of Hawthorn Ridge from a man named Josiah Pridemore, who gave his reason for selling as removal to the Western Territories. Pridemore did remove. He settled in Missouri, where he raised a family and lived to the age of 79, and in none of the documents associated with his later life, deeds, letters, census records, did he mention Greene County, Tennessee, or Hawthorn Ridge, or the land he had sold, or why he had sold it, or what he had sold it for. The consideration recorded in the deed is $300, which was below market value for that acreage in 1833. Pridemore's son, interviewed in Missouri in 1891 for a county history, said his father had described the East Tennessee property only once, when asked directly by a neighbor, that he'd sold it because it needed to belong to people who wouldn't mind whatever was already there. His son did not know what his father had meant by that. He had never gone back to find out. Caleb Dellacort was 41 years old when he signed the 1833 deed. His wife, Verity, is listed as 40 years old. They had, at the time of the deed, 7 children between the ages of 3 and 17, all listed by name in the household schedule attached to the transfer. By the 1840 census, the household had grown to include 4 additional individuals with the Dellacort surname, whose relationship to Caleb and Verity is listed as family, without additional specification. By 1850, the household count was 22. By 1860, 31. The 1860 census lists Caleb Dellacort as 68 years old, which is arithmetically correct given his recorded age in 1833. It also lists Verity Dellacort as 67 years old, which is arithmetically correct. These are the only household heads on Hawthorn Ridge whose ages in 1860 correspond precisely to their ages in 1833. Every other family on the ridge shows at least some discrepancy, the minor errors of census work done by memory and estimate. The Dellacort ages are exact. They are also the only household in the 1860 census for that district in which no member is recorded as having been born in Tennessee. The birthplace column for every Dellacort household member, including children who would have been born years after the family's arrival, reads, "Not stated." The census enumerator for that district in 1860 was a man named Silas Honeycutt. His field notes survive in a partial collection at a regional university archive. The notes for most households are brief and routine. His notes for the Dellacort household are a single line. Visited. Information provided by elder son. Did not enter. He does not explain why he did not enter. He does not explain whose elder son. He does not explain what information was provided, or how it was provided if he remained outside. He moves on to the next household without comment. There is a local custom in the part of Greene County closest to Hawthorn Ridge that no one can date and no one can explain the origin of. It is not written down anywhere. It is not spoken of directly. It is simply observed, the way old customs are observed, not because anyone remembers deciding to observe it, but because the community has always done it, and the people old enough to remember a time before it are gone. The custom is this. When someone moves to a property within 2 miles of the ridge's north slope, their neighbors bring food, as is common across rural Tennessee. But the food is brought within the first week, not at any random time. And among the items brought, there is always, without exception, a jar of something put up in summer, preserves, pickled vegetables, canned fruit. Always a jar with a sealed lid. And always, tucked under the jar when it is handed over, a sprig of hawthorn. Nobody explains why. If a newcomer asks, they are told it's just what people do around here. Which is true. Which has always been true, as far back as anyone can remember, which is not, in this part of East Tennessee, as far back as the ridge itself goes. A woman who has lived at the foot of Hawthorn Ridge for 43 years and who runs the small post office substation on the county road, a practical, plain-spoken woman who has no patience for what she calls story-making, was asked about the custom in 2018. She confirmed it exists. She said she had asked about it when she first moved there and had been told it was just something people did. She said she had observed it herself ever since, without examining the reasons, because some things you participate in not because you understand them, but because the people around you have always understood that you should. She was asked if she knew what the hawthorn was for. She was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window of the post office at the ridge above. She said, "I think it's a reminder, what you're near." She went back to sorting mail. Frances Millard's research notes, held privately and never included in her 1999 paper, contain one line that has nothing to do with the Dellacort family as far as anyone has been able to determine. It reads, "Quelch, check ledger." Nothing else accompanies it. Whether she ever checked is not recorded. and the name does not appear anywhere else in her surviving papers. Lemuel Cross, the Greene County surveyor, visited Hawthorn Ridge in the spring of 1841 to resurvey the boundary between the Dellacort property and an adjacent parcel whose ownership was in dispute. He made the trip twice. His field diary documents both visits. The first visit, in April, proceeded normally as far as the lower boundary of the Dellacort property. Cross noted the bearing trees, the creek crossing, the condition of the ridge road. At the boundary marker for the north slope, a stone cairn that the diary notes was not of the kind commonly placed by county surveyors, being of a different construction and apparently older than the 1833 transfer. He wrote that he had been met by a man who gave his name only as one of the Dellacorts, and who had accompanied him along the lower boundary without speaking. Cross completed his lower boundary measurements. He did not go further up the slope. His diary entry ends, "Will return. The upper corner requires a second visit." The second visit, in May, produced the shortest entry in Cross's 30-year career as a surveyor. It reads, "Went to the upper corner. Completed. Will not go again." He does not record what he found at the upper corner. He served as county surveyor for 11 more years after 1841, and was assigned the Hawthorn Ridge area on at least 4 subsequent occasions. Each time, his field diary records that he delegated the specific assignment to an assistant. He gives no reason for the delegations. His assistant's field notes for those visits do not survive. Cross retired in 1852 and died in 1867. His daughter, who had kept house for him in his final years, wrote a brief memoir of her father that was privately printed and circulated among family members in 1871. She describes him as a careful and confident man who was rarely troubled by his work. She notes one exception. She writes, "He would not speak of the Dellacort survey, and if it was mentioned in his presence, which we learned quickly not to do, he would leave the room." He left the room calmly, without drama, as though it were simply a place he had no reason to be. The ridge itself, the physical landform, the stone and timber and soil of Hawthorn Ridge, was surveyed for mineral rights in 1904 by an agent of a coal and iron company out of Knoxville. His survey covered the southern and eastern faces of the ridge thoroughly. His survey notes, filed with the company and later donated to a regional historical society by the company's successor firm, cover 41 pages. The northern face, the Dellacort face, the face covered in old hawthorn thicket, is covered in 2 sentences. The first sentence records that access was not achieved. The second sentence reads, "Survey of northern face deferred pending determination of access rights." There is no third sentence. The access rights were never determined. The company did not pursue the northern face. The mineral survey for that section of Greene County shows a blank where the Dellacort acreage sits, bordered on all sides by assessed and recorded land, a white space in the record that has the shape of the property and the weight of everything that has been consistently declined to be placed there. The 1870 mortality schedule, which records the deaths of 11 Dellacort family members across a 4-month period in 1869, was filed by an attending physician named Dr. Ezra Bolt. Dr. Bolt practiced in Greenville and made the ride out to Hawthorn Ridge twice during the reported illness period, once in July, once in October. His patient registers survive. The July entry records a visit to the Dellacort household and a clinical notation that spans 4 lines and then stops mid-sentence. The October entry is a single word, deceased. Dr. Bolt filed the mortality schedule. He listed 11 deaths. He gave 11 causes. He retired from practice the following year at the age of 44, 20 years before most physicians of his era and financial standing would have done so. He moved his family to Nashville. He did not practice medicine in Nashville or anywhere else after 1870. He died in 1903 without having discussed the Dellacort matter in any document that has been found. His patient register, with its mid-sentence entry from July 1869, is held in the State Archives in Nashville. The sentence breaks off after the words, "condition of the eldest, who I estimate to be." The estimate is not completed. There is a reason the mortality schedule filed by Dr. Bolt carries a particular weight in this account, beyond the evident strangeness of 11 deaths in 4 months from unrelated causes. The reason is the names. The 11 names on the mortality schedule include Caleb Dellacort, aged 76, and Verity Dellacort, aged 75. Ages consistent with the 1860 census figures. Ages consistent with the 1833 deed. They include 7 additional Dellacorts of various ages and 2 individuals listed without surname, described only as members of household. The mortality schedule itself is a single page, handwritten on standard government issue paper, held flat in a manila sleeve in the State Archives in Nashville. The archivist who manages that collection, a man who has worked with death records for 19 years, and who regards them with the professional equanimity of long familiarity, was asked in 2021 whether the Dellacort mortality schedule was in any way notable as a document. He looked at it for a moment. He said the document itself was standard in every formal respect. He said the causes of death were plausible individually. He said that if you read the 11 entries in sequence, a certain quality emerged that he found difficult to categorize in archival terms. He said the entries read, taken together, less like a record of deaths and more like a record of something that had been concluded. He used that word, concluded. He said he was not sure it was the right word. He said it was the word that came to him. He filed the sleeve back in its box. He moved to other matters. He is a careful and experienced professional, and he has learned, in 19 years of handling death records, to trust his instincts about documents without necessarily following them anywhere. What the mortality schedule does not include, what it cannot include, because the census has already counted them and the county has already registered their existence, is the child listed in the 1860 census as the youngest Dellacort household member, a girl named Iris, aged 4. She would have been 13 in 1869. She is not among the 11 dead. She is not found in any subsequent record in Greene County. She is not found in any subsequent record in Tennessee, or in any adjacent state, in any search that genealogical researchers have been able to conduct. She was counted alive in 1860. She was not counted dead in 1870. She was not counted anywhere else. A woman named Nora Fitch, who had lived her entire life on the eastern slope of Hawthorn Ridge, gave a single recorded interview in 1931, conducted by a journalist from Greenville who was writing a feature on the old families of the ridge. She was approximately 70 years old. She was the granddaughter of a family that had farmed the adjacent parcel to the Dellacort property since the 1840s. She had grown up within half a mile of the Dellacort thicket. The journalist asked her about the Dellacort family. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that her grandmother had told her never to go into the thicket on the north slope, and that she had kept that instruction without needing to understand it. She said the thicket was not a place people went. She said that when she was a girl, she had sometimes seen lights moving in it at night. Not fire, not lantern light, something else. Something without a source she could identify, and that she had learned, early enough that she could not say exactly when she had learned it, to look away when she saw the lights. The journalist asked when she had last seen the lights. She looked past him, toward the ridge, and said only that it had been the previous autumn. This was 1931. The last recorded Dellacort had been dead for 62 years. The last tax payment had been made 20 years before. The house, by every account, had been empty for decades. She looked past the journalist for a moment longer. Then she said, "I don't know who tends it. I know someone does." She went inside. The interview was over. The journalist published a short piece about the old families of Hawthorn Ridge that did not include any of what Nora Fitch had told him. He noted in his personal diary, which his family made available to a researcher in 2008, that he had not included it because he did not know what to do with it. He wrote, "She was not a fanciful woman. She was describing what she saw. I don't have a place for what she saw." The property at Hawthorn Ridge has changed hands twice since the Dellacort tax payments stopped in 1911. The first transfer, in 1923, was a county sale for delinquent taxes. The buyer was a timber company that did not develop the land and allowed it to revert to county ownership in 1941 for continued non-payment. The second transfer, in 1956, was a private sale to an individual buyer whose name appears in the deed record as C. Dellacort. The deed is filed at the Greene County Register of Deeds. It is a standard instrument. The consideration is recorded as $1 and other good and valuable considerations. The signature at the bottom is in a careful, deliberate hand. The register who processed the deed in 1956 initialed it and filed it in the ordinary way. She retired in 1971 and died in 1989. A colleague who had worked with her for 15 years said, in a recorded conversation in 2001, that she had mentioned the Dellacort deed once, shortly after processing it, only that the name had no business appearing on a deed in 1956, and nothing more than that. She had said it in a level voice, without explanation, and then had gone back to her work and had never mentioned it again. The 1956 deed remains valid. The property, under the name C. Dellacort, is assessed by Greene County at its current value. The taxes are paid every year, in cash, always in October. The bills, according to the clerk who currently processes the payment, and who was made aware of the account's history approximately 8 months into her tenure, when an older colleague thought it worth mentioning, the bills are always old. Not old enough to be refused, but old enough to notice. She has processed the payment for 3 years now. She notices the bills. She processes the payment. She does not look up the account history more than once a year, and she has found, over time, that once a year is more than enough. She was asked, in a brief conversation conducted for this account, whether she had ever seen the person who makes the payment in person. She said that the payment arrives in an envelope. The envelope is addressed in a handwriting she does not recognize. The envelope contains cash and a brief note that gives the parcel number, the tax year, and nothing else. She was asked whether the handwriting on the envelope ever changes. She thought about it for a moment, then said that it didn't. That the hand was the same every year, as far back as she'd bothered to check. She said it the way Amos Treadwell wrote about arrangements that are honored without examining. She said it in the voice of someone who has made a decision about what questions to carry and which ones to put down. The hawthorn thicket on the north slope of Hawthorn Ridge is still there. The forestry assessment from 1988 put its dominant trees at between 180 and 220 years old. They are 36 years older now. They are not old enough to remember the Dellacorts arriving. They may be old enough to remember what was on that slope before. Nora Fitch has been dead since 1944. The lights she described seeing as recently as 1931, not fire, not lantern light, something without a source she could identify. Those lights are not documented in any record after her 1931 interview. This is not evidence that they stopped. There is a name in a ledger at the Greene County Clerk's office that does not belong to this story, but that belongs to the same ledger, 3 pages after the last Dellacort tax entry. The name is Quelch, from a property in Yancey County, North Carolina, listed in a cross-county delinquency notice from 1879. The notice was filed and never resolved. The name sits in the ledger 3 pages from the Dellacort entry, in the same handwriting as everything around it, in the same ink, taking up the same small amount of space that unresolved things take up when they have been filed correctly and then left alone. The ledger is available to the public. Both entries are legible. No one has connected them. Not yet. Pastor Aldrich Kane wrote 3 letters about the Dellacort family between 1865 and 1870. The first 2 were addressed to his bishop and concerned the family's failure to attend services and what Kane described as a quality of separateness that goes beyond the ordinary reserve of mountain people. The bishop's replies were mild and administrative. The third letter was written in December of 1870, 6 months after the last Dellacort death was recorded, and it was never sent. It was found folded inside Kane's Bible when he died in 1881. His descendants have read it. They have kept it. They have declined across 4 generations to make its contents public. The current holder of the letter, Kane's great-great-granddaughter, who lives in Greenville, was asked about it in 2014 by a researcher. She confirmed the letter exists. She confirmed she has read it. She said it is in good condition. She said she would not be sharing it. She was asked whether the letter would change the understanding of the Dellacort family. It would change what people thought they understood, she said, and she was careful to add that this was not the same thing. The taxes are paid every October. The bills are always old. The handwriting never changes. The thicket on the north slope of Hawthorn Ridge is dense enough that a person standing at its edge cannot see more than a few yards into it, and the hawthorn thorns are long enough and close enough together that entering it would require, at minimum, a deliberate choice and a disregard for discomfort, and most people who have stood at the edge, the few people who have had reason to stand at the edge, have found that they do not make that choice. The land knows how to keep itself. It has been keeping itself since before Caleb Dellacort arrived in 1833 and chose it, specifically, from among all the land in Greene County that was available to be chosen, chose it, paid below market value for it, and settled his family into the thicket as though the thicket were not something to be cleared, but something to be joined. The 1833 deed is filed correctly in the register's office in Greenville. The signature at the bottom of the deed is in a careful, deliberate hand. The signature at the bottom of the 1956 deed is in the same hand. The county clerk who noticed this retired in 1971 and did not, in 20 more years of living, raise the subject publicly. She had her reasons. We are not going to guess at what they were.